So there's a comment on my video about the new Commander format, which was a draft format more than it was a Commander format, and I got a couple of comments about how people didn't know what I was talking about, and I suspect it's because they're not people that have played Magic the Gathering, and the video was made for people who were familiar and had played Magic the Gathering, and therefore it'd be pretty self-explanatory. But, you know, there are people that are interested in Magic the Gathering that may not know anything about it, and I don't think anyone has made a video or series of videos on the basics of Magic the Gathering in a very long time. I think it was something that early Magic YouTubers, some of who may not be making YouTube videos anymore, some of whom still are making YouTube videos, they may have made those videos and you may still be able to find them, but they don't get suggested to you on the algorithm unless you're kind of searching out that kind of thing or watching those specific YouTubers that made an old one and you're watching their old videos. But I don't think, as far as I know, anyone has made a basics of Magic the Gathering type of video where sort of a primer on what Magic is. And I made a video earlier back, which I will link up here or maybe it'll be over there. I don't know. I don't know how this works. I've linked video before, but I can't remember which side of the screen it ends up on. Anyway, I made a video. It was linked, and it's in the description as well, of me teaching my sister how to play Magic the Gathering for the first time using Jumpstart decks. And I think it went quite well. It's a very long video, so really there's only one reason to watch it. If you don't know how to play Magic at all, and you watch it, you'll kind of, I think, get an understanding of it, but it'll take you about an hour, and I don't know if anyone wants to spend an hour unless they want to get the basics of Magic the Gathering, so therefore I don't expect lots of people to watch this video. But this video, I'll start off with explaining what the cards are and what they do, and then I will talk about things like formats, i.e. Commander and Standard and Drafts, so that people can understand what the difference between those formats are, and then talking about how to play, maybe talking about strategies, maybe talking about building decks, just basically the things that someone who knows nothing about Magic the Gathering kind of needs to start off with. I'll make a playlist for it. I'll put them there. Maybe people will watch it and it'll help them out. It'll get them into Magic, or no one will watch it and I'll have wasted my time. But I don't consider any of these videos a waste of my time. I enjoy making them, so it doesn't really matter if nobody watches it. But I think at least one person appreciating it will be fine with me. So I'm going to get started, and I'm going to put cards up on the screen, and we'll talk about these cards, and I'll break down the areas, and hopefully I'll be able to do some fancy editing to make it look good for you and be a bit dynamic, and hopefully I can make it understandable. So let's start with this first card. It's the land. So a land is basically the most basic card in Magic the Gathering, and generally speaking, when you first start off, you'll have mostly basic lands. I'll let you know what the difference between basic lands and non-basic lands is in a second, but to start off, we look at the top left of the card. It tells you what type of land it is, whether it's plains, mountain, swamp, island, forest. But yeah, you can take a look at all these are the different lands. And then it has art that depicts that type of land. And in the middle bar, it'll say basic land, plains. Now these are keywords that other cards could reference and therefore can be attached to this card. Like it'll find this type of card, it will use this type of card. So these keywords are significant for that. And then further along to the right on that middle bar is the set that it's from. And then in the middle is usually a symbol, which means the type of color of magic that land produces. Now, there are rules for lands. No one ever needs to read them, but there was a secret layer, which was like a direct sale special box set of full text lands. because it was a joke and a play on full art lands, and there are full art lands in Magic the Gathering that have no text on them whatsoever, because they don't. Everyone knows how lands work at this point when you're playing Magic the Gathering, so they don't need text of any kind, and you can get what they're supposed to do. But the full text lands had the full rules for how lands work, and it was overly complicated, and it was meant to be that way because it was a joke and a play on full art lands. So lands in general do not have any text explaining to you what they do, because as I said, most people know what they do. So essentially, what happens with a land is you can play one on your turn, and usually it's a maximum of one. There are other cards that change that. You play it on the battlefield, and it enters untapped. And then you tap things to make them do things, and tapping usually means turning it to the side just to denote that it's been tapped. But essentially what you're doing is you're exhausting it, you're using it. Just think of it that way. And then when you tap a land, you're using it for the mana it produces. And therefore, a plains will give you 1 white mana. A forest will give you 1 green mana. A swamp will give you 1 black mana. A mountain will give you 1 red mana. And an island will give you 1 blue mana. And that's what you need to know. You need this mana to cast other spells. Now, we'll move on to the spells that you would cast. Now, the most common spell that someone will cast is a creature. So, up here is a creature, and on the very top left is the name of the creature. On the right side is the mana that it costs to cast this creature. So, in this case, let's say that it costs you 1 blue to cast the creature. And therefore, you tap 1 land, 1 island, that gives you 1 blue mana. That allows you to cast the creature, and it goes on your battlefield, and now that creature can be used. First of all, every single creature comes in with summoning sickness, meaning they can't be tapped on their turn, meaning that you can't use an ability to tap it, and you can't attack, because that causes it to tap. But other abilities that aren't tappable abilities can be used. And then, on your next turns, then you can tap the creature. Now, if, say, it has a blue and a 1, like, say, this card here, then that means that the blue is the blue mana that you need, and that 1 is surrounded in a gray circle, which denotes colorless mana, and therefore any mana can produce a colorless mana. You can use any mana for colorless. Therefore, you can use a plains, swamp, forest, island, mountain for colorless mana. And there are things that produce colorless mana, and there are some other types of mana that may or may not be colorless. But that is more advanced, and we don't really need to talk about that. So then, after you look at the name, and you look at the cost of the card to bring it out on the battlefield, you have the art, and then you have a middle byline that tells you what type of spell it is, and in this case, for creatures, it's a creature. And then it'll tell you the different types of creature it could be, whether it's humans, soldiers, goblins, minotaurs, any type of thing, and those will be keywords. And again, like the basic lands, those things are keywords that other cards can reference and therefore interact with. And then to the right is the set symbol again. And then in the box underneath the middle byline is the ability of the card, what it can do besides attacking. So every creature, unless it says otherwise, can attack. And attacking causes it to tap, at which point you are now attacking the other player, and they can use their creatures to defend, i.e. block. And blocking doesn't cause a creature to tap. And if a creature is less powerful or more powerful than the creature that it's blocking, then whichever creature has, can do the most damage and kills the creature. If they don't do damage to each other, then they don't kill each other. Anyway, so that is the main ability of every single creature, but then other creatures can have other abilities. And then below the abilities is the flavor text, basically. It'll be a quote, it'll be a history, it'll be something that adds flavor to not just the creature, but to the set that it came from, and also to the world that it's from, and magic in general. And so this flavor text was before there was any sort of fictionalization of magic, before there were books or stories or anything like that. These flavor texts gave us the information on what the worlds of magic were like. Then on the bottom left of every card, which I didn't cover with the land, but every card has the, well, modern cards anyway, have the set number and the set name, and the artist, that was on every single card throughout Magic, and the copyright and the year that it's copyrighted, and that also was in every card in Magic. Now, there's another type of creature, I'll put it up here, an artifact creature, and it acts like a creature, but it also acts like an artifact. And so I'll move on to artifacts, and just let you know that most artifacts are static, and they're just on the board, and they have abilities, you can tap them, or they just have an ongoing effect, or they can be sacrificed for other things. So again, you'll have the name of the artifact, the mana cost to bring it out onto the battlefield, the art, and then in the middle it'll tell you what type of artifact it is, and any other keywords that it could be, in the set that it's from, the powers that it has, the flavor text, the number of the card, the set name, the artist, the copyright. And in the case of creatures, if we'll look at both a creature and an artifact creature, you'll see at the bottom right a power on the left, and a slash, and a toughness on the right. So basically your power is how much damage you do to something, and your toughness is how much damage you can absorb before dying. And when it absorbs more than that, more than enough to get it to 0, then it has been removed from the game. But though that damage only is settled basically at the end of your turn. So if you can heal up the creature before that point, then it won't die. And there are some types of creatures that are different than others, and like I said, the keywords on the bylines can interact with other cards, but there are certain types of creatures called legendary creatures. And if it's a legendary creature, that means you can only have one of them if you're playing in a type of format where you can have more than one of a type of card in your deck. But with Commander, you can generally only have one anyway. And also it means that it can't be copied unless a card says that it loses its legendary status, or that it can be a copy of a legendary creature somehow. But also, a legendary creature can be your commander. And any creature that isn't legendary can't be your commander. And as I mentioned in a previous video, now certain artifacts that are called vehicles, I'll put one of those up on the screen, they become creatures when they are crewed by a creature that has power of the crew number. Like, let's say it says crew 2 in this case, and then you have a creature with a power of 2. Therefore, it now becomes active as a creature and can do the things that creatures do, i.e. attack or block. And normally, up until now, you couldn't have a commander that was a vehicle, but now the rules have changed and you can have a commander that is a vehicle. So that changes things, and so any legendary vehicle, any legendary creature, and just legendary creatures, legendary vehicles, legendary spaceships can be your commander. And that is just for the commander format, which I'll cover in another video. So then, the next most common spell, because this is what we're talking about spells, and creature is a spell. People often forget that. I often forget that. And I played a game just the other day where I completely forgot that creatures were spells, and therefore there was something that was supposed to trigger when spells were cast, and it didn't when creatures were cast because I forgot about it. So, just so you know, even if you've been playing for years, you'll forget about stuff because there's so much stuff in Magic. But the next most common type of spell that people cast are instants. And again, on the top left is the name of the instant. On the top right is the cost. In the middle is the art. There's a byline that tells you that it's an instant. And from time to time, there may be other keywords in there, but it's very rare for instants to have other keywords. And the set symbol, and then basically the ability of the instant, the flavor text, and then the stuff at the bottom, which I've covered already. So the ability of the instant happens instantaneously. And this is a good time to talk about the stack. Just a very brief overview. Let's say you cast a creature, and that creature attacks. And then someone gives it +1 power. And then someone else gives it -4 toughness, and it's going to die. And then you cast an instant that says counterspell. So, in the order of operations, the first thing that happened was the creature attack. That's the stack. On top of that is the +1 to power. And then on top of that is the -4 to toughness. But on top of all that is the counterspell. So the counterspell counters the -4. And then the +1 stays, and the creature attacks. So it's basically a last in, first out type thing. And that's all you need to really know about the stack right now. It gets very, very complicated the more things that are involved in the stack. But in Commander games, the stack doesn't get that high. That's more of a standard and a modern format type of play, right? So if you're playing Commander, it's not going to get as confusing as it possibly could be. So that's how instants work, and you want to note that they can be cast instantaneously, and they are, I believe, I don't think there's anything faster than an instant, like, as in, there's no delay in between when it comes in and when its power is activated. So therefore, you can cast it on your turn when someone else has cast something at you, and you can cast it on someone else's turn, and they can cast something back at you, or you can cast it as a reaction to something they did. And one of the common things to do is to wait until the end of someone's turn that is taking a turn just before your turn, and any open mana that you have and things that you want to cast that can be cast at instant speed can be used at that point, because on the beginning of your turn you're going to untap your mana. You're going to untap your lands, and you're going to be able to use your lands again on your turn. So the next spell is sorceries, and they're similar to instants, except that they can only be cast on your turn, and they don't happen at instant speed. They can't be cast in the middle of another action. They don't get cast on the stack at later than the first time that they're cast. So the stack could start with you casting a sorcery, and then someone casting an instant on top of that after that sorcery, and other people casting more instants. But there will only ever be one sorcery in that case, unless a card allows you to cast sorceries at instant speed. So again, top left, name of the card; top right, the cost of the card; and in the middle is the art. And again, the type of card on the middle left is sorcery. There may be other keywords, but it's rare. There's set symbol, and then the ability of the card, and the flavor text. And sorceries are very similar to instants, as I said, so they will have similar types of abilities, and it just means that they don't happen at the same speed, and you can't cast them on other people's turns. So the next spell type is enchantment. And now, sometimes enchantments can be auras. They go in creatures. But generally speaking, enchantments are sort of global on your battlefield. Meaning they're on your battlefield, and they're an ability that's happening, mostly affecting you. Some enchantments affect the entire table, meaning your opponents. And again, top left is the name of the enchantment. Top right is the casting cost of the enchantment. In the middle is the enchantment, and again, there could be other keywords like aura or other keywords that change the type of enchantment it is, and also change how it can interact with other cards. There's the set symbol, and there's the ability of the enchantment, what it's doing on your battlefield, and then sometimes flavor text, and again on the bottom, the copyright and stuff like that. Then finally, the newest of the card types because all of these card types existed from the very beginning of the game, the ones that we've covered so far. The card type that didn't exist until 2008-ish, I think, maybe later, was the Planeswalkers. So at the beginning of Magic the Gathering, when the game first started, in the rulebook it said that you were a Planeswalker and your opponent was a Planeswalker, and you were casting spells in a battle for dominance. And then they introduced Planeswalkers, which muddied the waters a little bit in that these Planeswalkers were now a multitude of them and not just you, and now they're working with you even though they're supposedly just like you. In any case, they're really cool cards and they're fun cards to play, so I think that maybe there was some pushback early on, and there's still some people who don't necessarily like Planeswalkers, and there's a lot of table or table rules or whatever that disallow Planeswalkers, or there's just sometimes you get together with some friends and everyone says, hey, we're not going to play with any Planeswalkers, because they can sometimes unbalance the game, although that was more likely to happen back in 2016 to 2020 or even before. Nowadays they're less sought after, as you can see by the price having gone down. They used to be very expensive cards, the best Planeswalkers, and now they're not that expensive, and people don't seek them out as much. So they've been sort of power leveled out at this point. But in any case, top left of the card is the name of the Planeswalker, and then top right is the casting cost, and then in the middle is the Planeswalker, and whether they're a legendary Planeswalker or not, and the name of the Planeswalker and any other types they might be or any other keywords, and then the set symbol. Now the Planeswalkers are very different than creatures, even though they may look like a creature. They go onto the battlefield and they can be directly attacked like a player. So like I said earlier, when you tap a creature, it is attacking the player. You can't tap it to target another creature that your opponent has, unless, again, a card says otherwise, but in general, that creatures attack the player. But when there's a Planeswalker in your opponent's battlefield, you can target the Planeswalker. And that brings down the value of the number on the bottom right, which is their loyalty. And their loyalty goes to 0, and they're removed from the battlefield. In the middle is their abilities, and you'll see that they have multiple abilities, from one ability to 3 abilities, maybe sometimes a 4th ability or even a 5th ability. And there's sometimes a static ability that it happens regardless of what you do on your turn. And then there's like a +1 or a +2, and then a -1 or a -3 or something like that, and then one that is like -5 or -7 or -10, and that's its big power. That the higher the negative, the bigger the power, and so that it has a basically what you would consider a minus power if it has a +1 or a +2 or a +3, and anytime you do that power, you don't have to spend mana to do that power. You basically gain more loyalty, and then the number on the bottom right increases. And if you want to do one of their negative powers, you remove that many loyalty counters. And again, if they go to 0, they die. So you can see that if someone has a -10 ultimate power, then they need to have 10 loyalty or more on them, and preferably 11 loyalty for them to survive. Preferably more than that if you still want to keep them around afterwards, because they'll likely be attacked, because you only need to do 1 damage to them. There's lots of ways to do 1 damage to a Planeswalker. So basically, the Planeswalkers are very powerful cards, and they have abilities that can enhance what you're doing with your game, but they aren't necessarily as powerful as they used to be relative to other cards. So those are the types of cards that you have with Magic the Gathering, and I just wanted to go over the basics of cards in Magic the Gathering. And my next video will be just discussing the basics of play, and it'll probably be a very short video because there's not much to cover, and it's better to have it short so that people can go over it multiple times. Anyway, see you in the next video.